Hello and welcome to Media Snack live from New York.
And greetings from London.
So we've got, I'm looking forward to this, as always, look forward to every week, as you know, at the end of the week. But today's episode, particularly today's guest, actually, is going to be really interesting. We talk a lot on Media Snack about the role of a media director, particularly the global media directors, and the evolution of that role and how difficult it's become, how to kind of spread yourself so thin across all these different things you're supposed to be the expert on. So we've got a great guest to talk about that, one of the best really in the industry, and so that's going to be really interesting. But also we're touching on some very topical things this week. There's been lots of discussion about changes particularly in the US, which we're going to focus on, to do with the upfront, which is the way that the TV market's traded here, and there's been some changes on that. And so our guest, Ben Jankowski, who's the media leader, has been global media lead for Mastercard for a number of years, but touches so many parts of the industry, seems to be involved. Ben has more hours in his day than anybody. I don't know how that happens, and we can ask him actually what his trick is. But he touches so many parts of the industry. But he's been leading an initiative at the ANA, which has touched on actually the upfront and strategies for the upfront. So unless you've got anything to add, we should just
get him on. Get him on.
Hey guys.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning.
Listen, thank you so much for coming on the show. We were saying just before in our little kind of virtual green room before, so I don't know why we have not had Ben on the show in the 5 years that we've been doing this, because you're one of the most well-known and respected kind of media executives that there is, and your point of view is incredibly influential and often referenced. So we're delighted to have you on. Thank you so much.
Delighted to be here.
Good. Well, listen, we'll get straight into it, because I think the first thing to do, I just want people to understand a bit about you, Ben, because you've been in a really high-profile media leadership role for a long time. But as I said in the intro, you're involved in so many other initiatives across the industry. So maybe just tell us about your role at Mastercard, and then the WFA and ANA and many other things that you're involved in as well.
Sure. So 10 years. Next month, 2 months. November will be 10 years at Mastercard, which has been a great experience. It's an amazing company. We do really cool things. It's fun to work for a company that's been really successful, and we've had a really, really good run for lots of really good, solid business fundamental reasons. Before that was a 28-year agency guy. So I have a passion for the agency work. That's how I grew up. I love it. So agency background, went to be probably maybe 2/3 of it domestic US, 1/3 of it global, and then took a marketer, decided to needed a new challenge with marketer side. So in this job, I'm also doing a lot of work, as Tom mentioned, for the World Federation of Advertisers, alongside of Jerry D'Angelo, who's my peer at P&G. We co-chair the media forum for the WFA, and alongside Jenny Gardner, the co-chair of the ANA media committee and media advisory board, which I know Tom wants to talk about a little bit. So trying to help the industry, leadership wise. I think one of the things that all marketers have realized, and actually Marc Pritchard brought this up 2 years ago at the ANA speech, took a while to realize that you normally think of your competitive set as like people you're fighting for market share with. In the things that we're trying to do in the industry, like we're partners. Like no one advertiser, the biggest advertiser in the world, probably only represents less than 5% of the market. Mm-hmm. So how do we, the value? We're going to drive change from finding ways to create scale and finding ways to to fight those same battles together rather than apart, because apart it just gets fragmented and splintered and nothing gets accomplished. So we worked hard as an industry to try to band together, have consistent, common things that we're trying to tackle, and make them action-oriented. And that's what both the WFA and the ANA have been really focused on.
Very good. I should have called out at the beginning, because we're live streaming, if you have comments or questions for Ben, please bring them in. There's one already, which I think we should flash up. Nadia, I don't know if I can bring this in, or maybe you can, from Donna at Dentsu, loyal viewer. Hello, Donna. Excited to hear from the one and only Ben. That's good to know. No one finding the business, a magnet for talent and vision. I think when it comes to talent, that's interesting because I mentioned at the beginning, you seem to have more hours in the day than anybody else, but I'm assuming that means that you've just got a great team that allows you to actually be involved in so many of these initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, we're all working really hard, right? And especially now in the pandemic, it's like the amount of hours. I mean, from the number of hours we thought we were working hard, and now we're like working from home. We think that sounds really cushy. The number of hours of so many of my peers, the number of hours that we've put in it just exploded. And part of it's because our commute has been, my commute walking down 2 flights of stairs is a heck of a lot less than people's hour-long commutes to get into Greater London or New York. So yeah, we've just squeezed so much more work, and the dividing lines between work and work and being at home have just gotten so blurred. I do have an amazing team. I have a small group of global people in the States, and then people in some hot some key locations around the world in Europe and the Middle East and Asia and Latin America. Do have an amazing team, but it's like we're all banding together. We're all working hard. Everybody in our industry is working harder than they did in February, and it's almost counterintuitive because of all the things you hear about, all the change and businesses slowing down and things like that. The business slowdown has created a work explosion, and we're all it's a lot, right? We're trying to change a lot in a really short period of time in a very uncertain market. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's highly relevant because I think in the year where there's uncertainty and change, the industry as an industry, we've changed so much and it's also rapid, the change, and that's the cliche. But it's in those times that we need clear leadership, and the leadership has come from, as you said, the trade bodies. I think in the last few years, who have always been doing amazing work, have really stood up, and particularly brought, as you say, these groups of very influential advertisers to work together to create guidelines to help others.
I think that's the biggest part. We never really worked together. We were kind of a body. We kind of learned from each other in a very broad sense. We never identified. It was harder for us to identify issues and try to tackle them together, and also lead. To be really fair, I mean, I think marketers would always be a little bit more laid back and let, the agency or the media community will figure those problems out. And, to a large degree, if marketers don't help drive it, we feel like we can help drive more change than just kind of sitting back and waiting for change to happen.
Good. And you've been doing that this week. So just tell us a bit about, so the ANA merged their measurement and media conferences, and that will happen virtually this week. And I know you were presenting at that. What was the experience for you?
Yeah, I mean, virtual conferences are always really interesting, right? And we've all kind of worked in this environment, and we kind of figured out, right? So to a degree, it's a different exchange because you can't have the personal interaction you have, but you also get the opportunity to have a lot more scale. So one of the things that Mastercard does a lot around experiences. We believe that experiences matter more than things. We used to do lots of live experiences around big events and big sponsorship things that we buy, and they were great for a really small number of people. Now what we've learned is, because we have to do them virtually just because of the environment we work in, so many more people can get exposed to it. So I think the same thing. There were 850 some people registered. I don't know what the normal attendance for the ANA media conference was, but 850 people to spend 2 days, talking about things that are going on in the industry. I think that, so the opportunity is to get more scale, and that's a really important part of it, right? Because especially for marketers, we're so splintered into so many groups, and it's so the base level of information and knowledge from the really hardcore chief media officer, like the nerds like me who live and breathe it and love it, versus like the marketer that's a really super long tail. So every marketer, we're working hard at, like, every marketer needs to kind of know what we're up to, understand the challenges we face, understand how they can compete differently in the marketplace in some of these things. So part of that education is a really big part of it. So I think that's a long-winded, long wound around way to say that things like the virtual conferences, one of the biggest benefits, it enables us to get a lot more people onto the tent.
Yeah. Ben, I just want to kind of tease out a little bit of the kind of the nerd in you when it comes to kind of being a chief media officer. So you've held that role for a decade now, and I think you've used this phrase a lot, and I love it, and I want to just understand what you mean by it. You say that within the organization you're the North Star for kind of media, and I think that's a really nice kind of way of encapsulating a leader's role within an organization. Can you bring that to life for me?
Yeah, I think there's so many things that we have to tackle, right? From the traditional of like, yes, I have to make sure that we have great insights and develop them into great objectives and solid media plans and strategies and executions. And now the other side of it is all the things we have to do around technology and measurement. I think if you don't have a plan, like everybody, if you don't have a plan for what you're going to try to accomplish, you can't just say, yep, I want to do all these things. These things are all important. Measurement and technology and having great media plans and executions are really important. So go get them, everybody. If you don't have a specific plan in place with specific and realistic targets and actions that you deliver against that, and even measures, like, we have, we try to, I'm a big fan of, I read an article once, the CEO of the Ford Motor Company explained the whole strategy of the company on one piece of paper. So I love like simplicity. So for the last 9 years, I've, one of the things is like, I really try to focus on what are we trying to accomplish on one piece of paper? What are the 3 big things that we want to try to accomplish? What are the actions we're going to put underneath those things? What are the measures that we're going to try to play? So if you don't have that map, and there's a bunch of analogies of like, you can't get lost if you don't know where you're going, things like that. If you don't have a map or a game plan of where you're going, it's really hard to know where you're going to get there, right?
And how do you? Sorry, carry on, please finish.
So if you don't have that idea, if you sit there, it's overwhelming. All the things that we have to deal with today are really, really overwhelming. And me and every one of my peers, one of my peers, we were talking at I think it was a WFA meeting, and they said, a chief media officer at a big global brand, he said, I spend 60% of my time doing media technology. And it's like, we all nod our head like, wow, it's a lot. But it's like, when do you do like your other stuff? So the amount of work is so overwhelming. If you can't chop it up and have a vision or a plan of what you're trying to accomplish, you can't just flip a switch and say, I'm going to go from okay to great. If you don't have a really specific plan of set metrics and ideas on what realistic expectations are, you're just kind of foundering around. I think you're just kind of foundering around. So we work really hard at being really specific about what we want to accomplish, how we're going to measure success, being honest with ourselves and calling ourselves out when we fail and celebrating when we succeed.
Yeah, and we hear when we speak to lots of kind of media leaders within organizations, many of the challenges that they have is getting internal traction. How do you kind of raise media higher on the kind of corporate agenda? How do you make it accessible? Because you say it is a very complicated, highly confusing subject matter, right? And our job is to simplify it. And you talked about simplifying the message there, but how do you get traction internally? You've obviously succeeded doing that over the last 10 years. Any guidance that you can give for other media leaders out there?
Yeah, it's harder than it ever has been. I think that, trying to figure out how to make things that are really practical and meaningful. And there's a couple spots, like yesterday, there was a woman from Eli Lilly, the chief media officer. Eli Lilly spoke at the ANA conference, and she said the biggest challenge was to get her CFO to think that media was an investment, not an expense. I mean, it sounds obvious, and we all try to, but thinking in like business terms that makes sense. I mean, brand safety is one of those things. No CEO or CMO is thinking about brand safety until their customers call them and ask them why they're funding terrorism. Which is like, and that's a radical example, but it's like, how do we find ways to make it really, there's nothing more important than our brand. So we have to make sure we keep it safe, and we have to do all these things to kind of drive it. How we drive, measurement. How do we measure success? Which sounds like basic plumbing, but in so many cases that we found, it's like, we really don't have a clear guide on how we're measuring success. And if we can't measure success, then we can't judge true, return on our investments and things like that. So I think making them as practical as you can to real business problems. CEOs don't care about CPMs. They care about how we can drive business, how to keep our brand safe, how to not piss off our consumers. So making it like meaningful, and this is nothing that you guys, everybody in the audience is like, well, of course we're doing that, but it's like getting out of the taking us from like the media nerds of like, what's my CPM, what's my viewability rate, what's all the like a million metrics we all look at, in like, so why does my boss, who's the global CMO, or his boss, who's the CEO, care about it? So just kind of putting that slant on it is important throughout the whole company. Yeah,
and I've got one more question before we move on. I could talk to you about being a chief media officer for ages. Like we do an entire episode on that, but just one final one. And Mastercard internally, there must be a great deal of appetite to bring things in house, right? To start taking further and further control of, because you're a performance business, right? You have a clear line of sight on your consumers and their spending and the data, and so there must be an appetite to bring more and more in-house. How do you temper that appetite in a measured way? How do you manage expectations and kind of strategic imperatives internally, given Kim, the position that you've got?
Yeah, I get asked that an awful lot. And you think the temptation, a lot of people are like, oh, wouldn't that be attractive to you, give you more, influence, more power, more things to do, things like that. I mean, I think I've been consistent, and I don't talk about it all that much, but I'm one of those chief media officers who thinks that, who struggles with the rationale around in-housing. I think that our agencies, if you don't feel, our agencies are experts and they're our partners, and they're valuable resources. They have the talent, they have the resources, they have the clout and leverage. They have, a variety of clients instead of just one client. They have all the aspects of, really having a comprehensive understanding of the media world that we desperately need. Like I struggle with people who think, and I get the part about, well, I have to make sure my data is really important to me, and I have to make sure that I keep it safe and secure. That's why I move all my programmatic in-house or something like that. I think that it's a lot easier to build an ironclad. I make it sound too simple, but it's a lot easier to build an ironclad contract where you can protect the safety of your data than it is for you to go find talent, go build resources, go, add staff and all those costs in-house. So I'm not, and that's kind of the angle that I have. I mean, for us, who is a medium-sized advertiser, if we were a different type of advertiser, if we were solely a performance brand, if we just, and in our business, this is an idiosyncrasy, we're a little more driven around getting people to use the cards they have and driving our strong brand rather than getting more cards out there. Because every MasterCard you have in your wallet didn't come from us. It came from RBS or Santander or Citi or whoever you bank with. So the banks, generally speaking, get more cards in force. We get people to use more cards. So it's a little less hardcore performance. If I were a hardcore performance marketer and I've spent time with, in the gaming industry, things like that, I might feel differently. But there's a lot of things around my brand and around measurement and things like that I need the resources of my agency partners.
Very good. Thank you, Ben. Now we're going to just talk a little bit about your role on the ANA Media Advisory Board. I think you're a co-chair of that particular board, and you've got some significant initiatives in play at the moment. Can you just share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Jenny Gardner from Unilever and I are the co-chairs of the Media Advisory Board. And a little bit of background, the Media Advisory Board is a subset of the ANA Media Committee. The ANA Media Committee is virtually anybody who's an ANA member, and there are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of ANA members who are interested in media. And we'd love to have the conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. To get things really accomplished, prioritize, plan, strategize, et cetera, you can't do it with a couple hundred people. So we formed the Media Advisory Board in the ANA last year, which is similar. The WFA, we did a similar thing with the Global Media Board, a smaller group. In the case of the ANA, it is 14 advertisers to talk about what our priorities are. So our priorities, right now we're doing a lot of things around the upfront. We've done some work around, there's been a lot of press, especially this week, around GARM. So, brand safety is super important. There's a lot of work being done around Partnership for Responsible Addressability. There's been a lot of work done in a lot of different space. The Media Advisory Board spent a lot of time talking about trying to help reform, the video market in the United States, which is, as I think it was Tom, maybe it was Dave, one of you mentioned how unique it was. It is certainly a unique market in terms of how the way the process is done. And there's lots of things that we're trying to change. So we're spending a lot of time as a Media Advisory Board to try to reform that video marketplace is one of the big things that we're trying to do.
Yeah. These are, amazing initiatives. I think they were, for those of viewers that were participated in the media conference this week, I think, you were talking through those things. Some really important initiatives. And, we've talked about it on MediaSnack before. I think having you involved both WFA and ANA and others, it's probably very good just to increase that level of coordination between the two, because whilst the US is a big market, it has huge implications on the global basis as well. And
super important. Yeah, and also doing some work now with co-chairing with Lou Pascalis and the Mobile Marketing Association, things like that. So there's the more we pull together, because again, we can't. I think in the past we've kind of splintered ourselves into a lot of pieces, and everybody's trying. Every association is trying to solve a problem. It just doesn't work that way because we become too splintered and all over the place.
Yeah, it's really good. So it's topical this week, as you just mentioned, because there's been some discussion around Upfront, which actually came out of the media conference, NA media conference. And we're not going to talk about any specific advertisers, although there seems to be some focus on some specific advertisers. But I want to talk about your perspective as the board. What would be helpful is, because we have MediaSnack viewers, many outside of the US, who may not be familiar with the unique dynamics of that. So probably no better person than Ben Jankowski to actually explain what an upfront is, because you've been involved in it so much over the years.
I'm not sure I'm the best person to be able to talk about it, but imagine, so the broadcast environment in the United States runs in a 12-month period, but one of the oddities is the 12-month period runs from October of the previous year through September of the next year. So now we were doing upfronts, which technically start in October of 20 and run through third quarter of 2021. And roughly 75% of all the linear TV activity in the United States, it's a ballpark number. It varies a little bit depending upon the market, but roughly 75% of the inventory that's bought is bought during the negotiation period of time that happens before that. And so that's the really 50,000-foot view. Tom, if there's more detail you want me to dig into, I certainly.
No, I think that's good. I think that's the unique dynamic. This is a weird thing. It's that so many companies operate on a calendar year financial. Not everybody, but lots of them do.
Most do. Yeah, most do.
The TV market's always followed the broadcast schedule, which is what actually the networks want, because they release new shows in Q4 typically, and historically TV's been bought on that basis.
Right. It's a legacy back to actually the 1960s, like 1960. It's a legacy where one fledgling network did a big deal with a car company, because actually the automotive companies started to introduce their next year's models in fourth quarter. So the legacy was a fledgling. Back then, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there were only 3 networks. One of those was fledgling and did a very big deal with the automotive industry. And all of a sudden, they sold so much inventory that everybody kind of took notice of that. And all of a sudden, we started a marketplace that was fourth quarter through third quarter. And Tom, you're right. One of the biggest changes we're trying to drive is timing, especially post-COVID, where we have an environment where there's just a lot of uncertainty. For us, normally the negotiations, the networks will announce their schedules in May, and we'll start negotiating in like May, June, July, and that's the normal sequencing. For me to go to my CFO, and I'm not alone, I'm saying this as a macro marketer, not me as going to Mastercard. For me to go to my CFO in May, because I have to prepare to buy and say, hey, we have a sense of what our budgets are going to be third quarter of next year. 18 months from now, they look at me like I have 2 heads. And they never like it, but like when there was this much uncertainty, it became really, really hard. So that kind of sparked a core group, and Karen Crawford from Nestle and Jenny Gardner from Unilever and I were we kind of started it, and the media advisory board certainly like spent a ton of time helping us. Was kind of like, what can we do around trying to bring some, a little bit more flexibility to that? And there's a bunch of different work streams. One was just moving the timing. Do we have to all move at the same time? One was around flexibility. If I buy, digital, or I buy, local TV, or I buy other media types, in digital, I can get out, I can change my activity within a couple of weeks. I can get 2 weeks. For the upfront, once you made your commitment, a large percentage of it was firm and non-cancelable. And there were a couple trigger dates that have a little bit of flexibility, but they were pretty antiquated. So one was moving the date back. One was, how can we create more flexibility? How can we be more contemporary about, what we measure against? I mean, doing deals based in today's day and age with technology and data, doing deals based on gender and age seems like we're in a Flintstones episode. I mean, there's so much more we can do around behaviors and understanding consumers better. There were some also things around, transparency. And I don't mean transparency in the agency client way. I mean information. I mean, we talk about, and Marc Pritchard talked about it this week at the ANA. I think what the word he used was, information asymmetry. Advertisers, they know what they're doing, but they don't have a real good sense of the entire market. How can we have a better handle of what's all the activity that's going out there, so we can all kind of understand and make choices based on a full set of information? So those four things, kind of transparency, working with more realistic ratings and better ratings, a little bit more flexibility for everybody, for both sides. All this is a two-way street, right? It can't be like marketers pushing demands on agencies or on broadcasters, because it doesn't work that way. It has to be a two-way collaboration of how can we change some of these legacy things that have been going on for 60 years. Yeah. So we're working on it. Oh, sorry, that's a really long answer.
That's good. Well, you not only answered the question I asked you, but you also answered the other two questions.
All right, what did I not answer? What question did I not answer?
Well, I was going to. I mean, I will follow up with that, which is, which is really about the sentiment of advertisers. I know that you can represent, and I'm not asking for your perspective, but the sentiment of advertisers has been that the upfront has been quite a challenge for lots of the reasons that you've mentioned. I'm sure there are some benefits of that. Of course, it's getting foresight and all those things.
There absolutely are. We believe in a marketplace. Like, we believe and understand, like, there's value in having a marketplace, and advertisers still want to have an upfront marketplace. There's value in that marketplace. We just want to kind of make it a little bit more contemporary. Yeah.
And then what I think you were suggesting were kind of recommendations, or the requirements then of the let's just say of ANA members, because that's the forum that you've been discussing in it. Is that going to result in some specific asks of the market, or some specific guidelines for advertisers?
Yeah, so we're working as a group. I mean, requirements is a strong word. We're not going to write down a list of, we're not going to cobble 10 commandments on a stone tablet. We are working with the ANA, is working with the 4As, which is the domestic body of advertising agencies, and also working with the VAB, which is the broadcasters, body. So we've kind of pulled together as ANA, VAB, and 4As. We're working on these 5 topics, and we've got groups together to try to talk about these 5 topics. There's a couple other things in there. Equality, how can we drive social change? There's other topics that are in there, but we're working. Marketers can't do it by themselves, and we want to lead. We think it's more important for us to kind of develop strategies and try to lead, but we can't do it by ourselves. We need the partnerships of our agencies, and we need the partnerships of our media partners to be able to help drive that. So we're working, the ANA is working with the 4As and the VAB to try to drive some of these changes. Yeah. And we're hopeful. It's hard, right? It's you're trying to break down 60 years of legacy. It's hard. We're making progress, but it's small progress. It doesn't happen overnight.
And in our observation, the change happens when there's that collaboration and that leadership, and that's fantastic. I promised right up front I wasn't going to mention P&G or Marc Pritchard, but you did. So I feel like I'm obliged to.
Yeah, I said what he said. Okay.
which is good. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because we're not going to talk about his specific announcement, but one thing that Mark did say, and we've heard this from other advertisers, is that it probably presents the opportunity to have more direct conversations with publishers or networks. That doesn't necessarily mean direct deals going around the agency or cutting entities out, but it's just, it's know your partner, which is what we're getting, that sentiment from lots of our clients is, so it's been quite good, the opportunity to now sit down and have one-to-one relationships with some of the networks and publishers that maybe we didn't have before. Is that something you can see?
I would suggest, when you talked about insourcing, I said that I think I'm consistent in the unique environment around the whole model. It's not a linear model anymore where it's like you have an advertiser who talks to an agency who talks to a media owner. Today, it's much more integrated. It's much more three legs of a stool rather than a linear process. So just because for a lot of reasons, some of it's data, some of it's trying to get closer to how ideas can help us drive our business. The agencies and the marketers and the media owners work together as a partnership a lot closer than we used to. I mean, in the old traditional, when it was only a transactional model, we didn't really need to talk to the media owners because all we're doing is talking about, we're talking about a CPM or, when we're talking, but now we're talking about much more deeply rooted partnerships and integrations. It doesn't mean that I'm having a direct relationship. It means the partnership looks different. It's a collaborative effort between agencies, marketers, and platforms, and not a linear relationship that has a big giant wall between me and media owners. So I think it's the way the relationship works is the productive way to think about that.
So it's not a wedge between agency and client. It's actually more of an enabler than that in terms of a true partnership.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. It's good. And the agency community kind of acknowledge that sentiment, and they're leaning into that new type of partnership role as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, every client's different. Some clients do, like in my specific case for our business, we're not, and again, it's not that we don't care about efficiencies. We want to build a lot more. We've relied upon our media partners and our agency to do a lot of really interesting things. Like we've got a lot of examples of how we've created great, cool experiences around our brands and around products. We do a lot of sponsorships and things like that. So how can we create great consumer experiences? And that's not, I got a lower CPM. That's how I built a cool environment. And whether it's, a product integration into a show or a cool way to get ourselves mentioned during a sporting event, things like that. That's more what we're trying to do. Every marketer is not like that. There's some marketers that are still, pretty transactional. So their needs may be a little bit less. But for some of the cases, it depends on the advertiser and what your ultimate goal is. And some are more dependent on a variety of factors than others.
Well said. That's
awesome. We'll begin to close up, I think. Ben, thank you so much for that. Really, really helpful. And
thank you guys.
We always, over the years, we've always kind of asked marketers, what's the kind of change you'd like to see in the industry in the next 12 months? But what we're finding that now, I think with your increased collaboration, particularly through the trade bodies, it's really clear what people are trying to do now. It's much more of a public dialogue, and I love that.
I think that's a great accomplishment. And if all we've done is raise awareness for what we have to get accomplished, then I'll feel pretty good about the progress that we're making.
Good.
We have to make more work. We have to, get these things executed. But even like the first step is awareness, and I think that we're working really hard, and it's not easy work, but I think we're making progress. So I'm glad to hear you say that now it's clearer than it was. So that makes me feel good.
It is. And the industry thanks you for your leadership, I'm sure, because as I say, you sit with a consistent voice across all of this stuff. It's really helpful.
A ton of people work, as hard or harder I do. Team effort. It has to be a team effort. And we have, great teams with the WFA and the ANA, and we're working hard to try to drive change.
Yeah.
So thank you.
There's one final comment I just want to bring up. Nadia, bring up Stephen's comment. Now, this is for Stephen White, and I don't know, there's so many Stephen Whites in the industry. I don't know which Stephen White might be. Where were you this time last year? So what's that about?
Last year, we think about where were you? One of the big sponsorships that we do is the Rugby World Cup. So last year I spent 8 weeks and, might have been sitting at a dinner table with Stephen, in Tokyo, working at the Rugby World Cup, which is
right.
that wouldn't have happened this year. Even if it had happened a couple months later, when it was right when the pandemic was kind of hitting, we were really fortunate that Rugby World Cup, which ended on November 5th. You think about when Asia started getting the really get scale of first cases, things like that. We got rugby in by, we're really lucky to have pulled that off, and we did some really amazing stuff. And Stephen and the agency are great partners. But we were in, Stephen and I were in Japan doing Rugby World Cup.
Nice work if you can get it. Good luck with that. And Susan's comment as well.
As well for England as they wanted to, but they had a good tournament. But anyway.
Nadia, just bring up Susan's comment, the one at the bottom there. There's lots of kind of gushing sentiment coming through, Ben. You've touched a lot of people over the years, and I think inspired them. So your insight and mentorship is something to be admired. Thank you. And there's a number of other comments that are in line with that. Ben, thank you so much for your time. Keep well. We look forward to seeing you again in person at some point in New York.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend,
thanks,
everybody.
Ben.
Yeah.
Nice to see you again.
Thanks for your insight.
Good man.
Somebody else commenting that Ben actually got them to be a fan of rugby. So we know that. Oh, there we go. There's
PJ.
Hey, PJ. Good. Awesome. Excellent. We love having media leaders like Ben and others on the show, and you can see them all in the the archives going back many episodes with people like Ben. It's such
good. Impressive
opportunity. That's it. There's if you want to know more about understanding how to transform your media operations, you can go to idcomms.com, which is our website, which is the company, as you might know, that David and I run with many others. And we help a lot of advertisers go through those kind of transformations. Not Mastercard, I might point out there. This is not an advert for endorsing us. But if you go to idcomms.com, you can actually get quite a lot of resources there to help you understand how to transform your media operation at the same time. Good. Well, I think that's it for this week. Anything else to add?
No, that's all. All good. It's a wrap.
Excellent. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to be notified of future episodes. We're live every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. UK and around the world. Thank you so much for your comments today. We'll see you next week.
Bye for now.